So we all work on the web, and we're all in like different little specialties. I started making this list, and this is as far as I got before I got really bored. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And we all have, like I said, our own little specialty. You know, we're designers, programmers, engineers, analysts, etc. But because we work on the web, we can't just stay in our specialty. We have to move out to learn other things, kind of like the opposing spectrum. I've been working for the last couple of years specifically teaching people how to program with my book series, Hello Web App, which is right up here. And working on how to teach people who are not programmers, who don't have a background in programming, how to teach them how to program. So I'm pretty proud of these books. And while working on these books, I've been thinking a lot about the other side of the spectrum. How do you teach someone who isn't a designer how to design? And I don't mean design as in like becoming a designer. But when you work on the web and you're a programmer or a writer or a salesperson or a marketer, you're probably at some point going to have to design something. Say the homepage for the web app, or excuse me, for the project you just built, your open source project, your homepage, the front page of your homepage. You can't escape being doing some sort of design. You don't want to have to, like, every time you have to design something, hire someone to do design for you. And for the designers in the audience, hopefully the tips I go over in this presentation will also be helpful because, you know, I have a background in design, I have a BFA in graphic design, and I'm constantly asked by people, like, how do I become a better designer? So hopefully these tips will help you figure out some shortcuts and some principles for teaching people how to become a little bit better at design. Design is kind of intimidating. Like looking at this, there's so many different fields within design. And when someone says, I want to become a designer, you could be like, oh, you mean UX design, UI design, visual design, sound design, et cetera. Like, what do you mean by becoming a designer? In this presentation, I just want to go over how to create more effective, basic designs. Just getting someone from 0 to 1, making them more comfortable starting out doing design for themselves. So first and foremost, let's talk about clutter. When someone comes to me and says, hey, how do I become a better designer? They're usually asking not about user experience, which we'll get into in a second, but more of how can I make my designs look better and look more professional, more clean. So clutter is going to be the #1 thing I want you to remember. For example. So the fastest way to become a better designer is just to think about clutter and think about ways that you can reduce clutter. I built this little widget, and we're going to go over some design principles and how they apply to this widget to cut down on clutter and make this little widget look a little bit nicer. So to start out with, let's talk about the grid. The grid at its basic core is just simply lining things up because pixel differences are unconsciously or even consciously noticed. There's that story about the designer who works with a developer, and the designer builds that pixel-perfect composition, hands it over to the developer, and the developer builds it, and then the designer comes to it and goes, hey, this is 2 pixels off. And the developer's like, why does 2 pixels matter? And this story is usually told as a way of like saying, oh, look at these designers, they're totally crazy. But those little pixel differences can make a difference. And I'm a huge fan of shortcuts. It drives me absolutely nutty every time I see these posts, like blog posts and Medium posts saying, hey, stop relying on frameworks. We need to teach people how to design from scratch. But for someone who's just starting out with design, just trying to get their homepage design up, I love Bootstrap because, you know, it has all these things included a grid to help you just essentially line things up and make things look a little more clean. So for our little widget here, we're just going to line up the edges, kind of vertically align everything, and you can already tell that it's looking a little bit cleaner. Next principle is color. So these are the big overarching principles, and color is a huge subject. I did a whole quarter in college on color theory, and dear God, I never want to do it again. I learned a lot, and a lot of the things, like the basic principles to remember, is essentially to keep your colors complementary, and I'll get to that in a second, and use mostly neutrals, and one brighter color for important things. All these principles that I'm going to go over, they can be, you can always break these rules later, especially once you get more skilled, but I like to give principles in the beginning, just like little guidelines to remember for new designers. So if you're looking for a more complete resource about color, I particularly like this article here, The Simple Web Developer's Guide to Color by Smashing Magazine. And it goes over pretty much what it means by complementary colors and good principles and things to understand in this one article. But I also, again, am a big fan of shortcuts, and this is my absolute favorite shortcut when it comes to color. Color Lovers is a place where you can submit color palettes and then have the community vote on them. And you can search by all palettes, like most loved palettes of all time. And here and get color palettes that already are guaranteed to be complementary, that work well together, and you have a lot of different options to go from, rather than, say, starting a color palette from scratch. This is where I got the design for my book series, Hello Web App. It's where I got the design for my startup, WeddingLovely. Like, I am trained in color theory, but I will never, ever do it. It's much, I don't know. It's too much for even me. And I like to use the shortcut of Color Lovers. So when you go back to your widget, you can go into Color Lovers, find palettes that you like, and start applying them. And some of them might not work out, but you can start trying different things and seeing if something works better than the other, and find something that you like. It's a great shortcut for choosing colors for whatever you're designing. The next principle is fonts. Again, the principles of this is to keep the number of fonts low. A good rule of thumb is to use 2 different fonts. Use fancy or display fonts sparingly. And by that, I mean these ones I have in the background. They're very cluttery. They're not very clean. And if you need to add more differentiation, you can vary weights and style and transforms and use that to differentiate parts of your website. But again, for shortcuts, so say if you went onto Google Fonts and you're looking through, I think, all 200, maybe more, different fonts that they have, and it's very overwhelming. I like to go places like Beautiful Web Type, Typewolf. There's a lot of different collections on there that says, hey, instead of 200 web fonts, they say, here are the best 20. So having these little shortcuts, having curated fonts will make it easier for you to look through like a smaller set and make it easier for you to find the best fonts for whatever you're designing. So back to this little widget. I'm going to update the fonts. We're going to just use 2, one serif, one sans serif. We have some different styling. There's italics and lowercase in the form. There's uppercase tracked out a little bit on the button. But these are essentially 2 different fonts. And it's starting to look a little bit better. Last but not least, white space. White space is the ultimate clutter reducer. I always laugh because I go onto Hacker News pretty much daily. And every 6 months or so, someone comes along and says, hey guys, I updated, or I created a new design for Hacker News. I redesigned Hacker News. And every single time, these designs, they immediately open it up. They add more white space. They make things a little bit less cluttery. Like it's now a game with me whenever I see that. I'm like, white space, white space. For a more subtle example, sometimes you can't really add buckets of white space, but this is the redesign of the New York Times website. They have a lot of content, and it's really hard to make this content look clean because there's so much there. But the before is on the left, and the after is on the right. And one of the biggest things that they did to improve their design was just added a little bit more spacing in the columns between text. By just adding a little bit more space, made the right look a little bit cleaner than the left. White space is also a huge trend right now. I went onto one of those top CSS design websites and I grabbed a random screenshot, and every single one of these is like acres of white space. So yeah, the trends are working on your side. But white space also can improve your conversion rates. White space can make it easier for your users to find what they need to do and do what you want them to do, like fill out a form or buy a product. So in this example, simply by adding more white space in between the tables, The left, you can see there's some links that are underneath the button. The right, that space is opened up. And that led to an increase in conversion, led to an increase in products added to cart, and it led to an increase in customers continuing through to purchase. So white space reduces clutter. It's very trendy. It looks very modern right now, but it also can improve your bottom line. So back to the little widget. We're going to add some more space, and it looks even more clean. So remember, when you're working on the visuals part, the number one thing to remember is to reduce visual clutter. And you can do that by keeping the number of fonts and colors low, adding white space, and lining things up. Aiming for a clean design will get you so far. But user experience and how people use what you're building is also very important. So one thing to remember, always look for what the action is in your design, what you want people to do, and make sure that action is easy to find and use. That's why the buttons in our little form here are bright orange. It makes it easier for someone to say, okay, this is what I need to click on, this is what I need to do, rather than, say, hiding that button. And that's why landing pages have big, bright buttons on their homepage like mine, or this one where the background is fairly neutral and a bright blue button. It doesn't just have to be landing pages and big banners. It also can be, say, a widget in the bottom that says, hey, if you're interested in a job, click here. Making things that when you want someone to complete an action, make sure that it's easy to find and use. And when you're working on a new design, make sure you're not just relying on yourself. Make sure you're getting a second or third or fourth opinion on your designs, either with your future self. Take a step back, go to sleep, look at your design the next morning, and kind of reevaluate it with new eyes, or run your design by others and see what problems they might run into. It's kind of hard to accept criticism from others, but it's very important when you come to design, because those people will help you figure out if your design is working well. Then quickly into content, because this is a big area a lot of people miss. Content can be very cluttery. And a good rule of thumb for content is that less is more. The shorter you can write, the shorter your paragraphs can be, the easier it is for someone to read, especially because people on the web skim. If you can't cut down your content, break into bullets when you can. So for example, the paragraph on the left here is kind of one big block of content. You can read it, but you'd have to go line by line. It's pretty difficult, and if you're skimming on the web, you probably just skip it. You make it easier to read by breaking it into bullets, giving the eye a place to land as they go through that paragraph. And you can further improve readability by adding some of that bolding we talked about. By bolding the important parts of these paragraphs, making it even easier for someone to skim, see what that paragraph is about, and then read further. And you can further improve the readability by adding some spacing, as we talked about. For a real-life example, this is my friend's website, Read the Docs. And I was on here the other day, and I noticed that the hover on the form, there's a bright green hover. This is what the website looks naturally. And if he came to me and said, hey, Tracy, how would you improve my homepage? How would you make it easier to use? This is something I would test. You don't have to just implement something. You can just test it out and see if something works, because this version of the website doesn't really direct you what you need to do. Everything is very gray. And it already has this hover element, and we just talked about making sure the action of your pages should be easy to find and use. We also just talked about content. And what you could do is take that beautiful paragraph. This looks really nice. And this technically isn't as nice looking. But this is something I would test. I would test whether this paragraph is more easily understood if it's broken up into bullets, if there was some strategic bolding that was added, if that headline, which it says, what is this place? If that headline answered that question, rather than asking the question that someone might already have in their mind. So this is one of the things I would test on this real-life website using those principles that we just went over. And quickly into headlines, because it's another area that's often missed. When it comes to headlines, try to talk benefits, not details. Talk about what it's going to do for the person reading your content or reading your web page, rather than what it's going to do for them, rather than what it does. And headlines also benefit from keeping it short, keeping things short, sweet, easy to read. And if possible, write like a human, not a robot. Try to sound more friendly, sound a little bit more like you're having a conversation with someone rather than just stating facts. For example, this is technically what my books are about. My books are an introduction to building web apps using Python and Django. But this is boring, this is long, no one wants to read this. This is actually what my books are about. This is what it does for the person coming to my website. This is more exciting. So this is a little bit into marketing. But it's one of those kind of things to remember, that the headlines of your websites or your web apps or your forms are as important as the design and how it works. And these kind of things can affect your bottom line as well. This test changed the headline from talking about what it does to what it's going to do for the person reading it. And that improved their conversion by 52.8%. So we're back here. We're not done yet. We just went over content, over headlines. You might notice that this is kind of long content. The headline is kind of boring. And we can update both of those. We can make that headline a little bit more fun, a little bit more about what the person is there, hopefully excite the person reading that headline. Adding some bolding in the content. We change the form. Rather than just saying email address, a little bit more friendly, we say add your email here, and change the button from just simple download to send me free info. So, in each of these little things we've learned, we've gone from here to here. Hopefully that helps illustrate how lots of little improvements can help something overall. All right, a little bit into theory. So if you're sitting down and you say, I'm going to design this. And you pull out your piece of paper, you put it on your desk, wipe everything else out. You sit down with a pen, and you're just going to start sketching and figuring out ideas without anything around you. That's a lot like trying to program without the use of Stack Overflow. It's like shooting yourself in the foot. It's giving yourself a handicap. No one really designs from scratch. My books wouldn't look like, I'm not going to say I'm the best, most amazing cover designer in the world, but my book looks so much better because I had the wonderful A Book Apart books as inspiration. I was able to look at those books, see the cover quality, see the paper quality, see their size, the length of the books. And because they're so amazing, I use them for inspiration, and my book was better for it. When it comes to design, there's lots of places on the internet that showcase great design that you can go and see and look for inspiration, like Site Inspire, Unmatched Style, CSS Mania. You can go on here and see, find websites or designs that relate to what you're trying to do yourself, and look at what they're doing well and try to pick that out, use it for inspiration. Don't steal, but it's, use it for inspiration. It's highly, highly encouraged to do so, and that's what all the designers do. So when you find something that works well, like this really nice Slack homepage, start training your design eye. Look at the design and start trying to pick out what it's doing well. So you might say here, okay, the form has this dark background behind it, which adds more contrast, which makes it easier, for the eye to point over to it. The button is green, which makes it stand out from the rest of the background. There's those little squigglies underneath the headlines. It looks a little bit like hand-drawn, which is something you don't really see in the designs, which also catches the eye, makes it look more interesting. They have bolding on NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Slack and free, so someone can just at a glance see NASA, Slack, free, all the important words. On the top right, there's the creative team, has a border around it. There's all these little things that the Slack homepage is doing. And if you find a design that works well, or your competitor, go through it and try to pick out what it's doing well. It's going to help train your design eye and make it easier for you to regurgitate those design ideas into your own designs later. It's kind of a meme, great artist copy, good artist copy, great artist steal by Pablo Picasso. And then Bansky comes along and says the bad artist imitate, the great artist steal. There's a whole lot of books about this concept. Don't think you have to design from scratch. Use inspiration as much as possible. All right, last but not least, a quick overview of a design process, especially as it works for me. So you're sitting down, working on a new design. Number one, we just talked about collecting inspiration and sketching some ideas. Start sketching the ideas that you get as you look at other web pages, sketching out the ideas that you pick up, the good things that other web pages are doing. This is specifically how I do it. I have a Feedly, I have a whole on category for designs. When I work on something on a new design, I go through here and I tab through, seeing lots of things at a glance. I can open things up in a new tab and kind of pick through it as needed. Now when it comes to sketching, sketches don't look like this. This person is showing off. Don't worry about like pixel perfect, beautiful sketches. These are actually my sketches from my recent redesign for the Hello Web App website. And it's just boxes and lines and just little notes to help me remember what I needed to, like the ideas I was generating for this layout. It's really, really simple. Your sketches do not have to look really that awesome. And then the next thing is a lot of people talk to me is like, hey, do you go straight from sketches and ideas, do you go straight into code or do you mock it up? And I'm a huge fan of mocking things up because when you're testing out layout ideas, you're testing out how things are going to work, it's much easier to move elements in a mock-up than it is to do when you're in code, in my opinion. And again, your mock-ups don't have to be pixel perfect. I use Sketch for my mock-ups, but you can use something like GIMP. And this is just for me to figure out how the layout of this website was going to work. Now, help me figure out that instead of having a paragraph at the top, I wanted to have a bolded list. I wanted to have it generally in one column with two elements off to the side. This is not the background color it's going to be. It's not the fonts it's going to be. It's not the imagery. But being able to mock this up just really, really simply helped me a lot for building this design. And sometimes I do full-on like pixel perfect, beautiful designs, but really, most of the time, it's something like this. And then build it, which, we all know that. So a little bit of reassurance. Every single time, to this day, every single time I sit down and work on a new design, this is what goes on through my head. It never goes well. I always sit down and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am a horrible designer. What happened? Did I forget everything I ever learned? This is terrible. What am I doing? Like intense amounts of imposter syndrome. And sometimes it's not even like yes. Sometimes it's like, maybe this is working. So if you're sitting down working on a new design and you're hating it and nothing's working out and you think to yourself, I'm such a terrible designer. I hate design. I can never become a designer. You're not a bad designer. You simply are a designer. This is the process. I go through it too. So this is only the starting point. I hope in this 20 minutes I gave you little pieces of knowledge to help you become more confident with doing your own design. Remember, when it comes to visual design, reduce visual clutter, number one. And do that by keeping the number of fonts and colors low, adding white space, lining things up, keeping your content short and easy to skim. Make sure that your goal is easy to find and use. Keep your content simple, friendly, and to the point. And above all, practice, practice, practice. Because you can't become a better designer just by reading about it. You have to do it. You have to work on it, and it will get better over time. This is going to be the topic of my third book. If you're interested, I'm actually filming the Kickstarter in a couple of weeks, the Kickstarter video, so it will be out in about a month, the Kickstarter itself. So if you're interested in Hello Web Design, this is the form that's simply here for updates about the book. Nothing else, no spam, et cetera, so forth. hellowebapp.com/web-design. Otherwise, thank you so much for having me.